Okay, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Stony Brook University. My name is Brian Cully. I'm a professor here at the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences, which is actually down the road a little ways and so forth. Thank you so much for coming out on this, feels like what, January? What month is it? November evening and so forth. We're going to talk about a very important topic here today on hazardous weather communication. That's our topic. So I really appreciate you coming out on this cold evening. There's been a lot of interesting work going on post-Sandy, given hazardous weather, extreme weather, especially on the modeling side. You saw a little bit what's going on upstairs with the reality deck, right? But one topic we thought we want to have more discussion is the communication aspect of the problem, which sometimes gets ignored and so forth. So that's going to be our focus here. And this is a partnership, a collaboration. I want to at least acknowledge a few people here. We have Mark Kramer in the front, let's say from the AMS chapter. Looming around somewhere is Jeff Tung, who helped out here from the National Weather Service. We have several Weather Service people, so it's really great to see them here this evening. And then Lisa Bastian, where's she at? From Nassau Community College, back in the back there. Thank you, Lisa. And I'm not sure if he made it, he may still be upstairs, but is Harris or Ari Hoffman anyone for the reality deck here? No, they're still in the reality world. But I really thank them, and they gave you a little bit of taste of the modeling side, right, which is that physical modeling side of things. But today we want to talk about the communication. So the way this is going to work is that we have a fabulous panel here, outstanding panel, who I'll introduce here in a second, from various locations talking about the communication issues from their point of view. But we need your help. This is supposed to be interactive. So one thing, I have a list of some questions as well, but I want you guys to think of some questions. So one way to do that is, we do have, may have seen them when you came in, and Mark has them in the front, little 3x5 pieces of paper. If you want one, just raise your hand. We'll pass them around. And that'll be one way for us to get questions going and so forth for this. So without, let me introduce the panel here. We have a distinguished panel here from the region, here talking to us about this issue of communication. Let me just start from, I guess, your left to the right here. We have Jason Tuell, who's the director at Eastern Region for the National Weather Service. So let's give Jason a round of applause here. Then we have David Zatlin, representing the OEM for Nassau County. Let's give David a round of applause. And then we have Edward Schneyer from Suffolk OEM. Sorry. And then we have Rich Hoffman from News 12, Long Island, a meteorologist there. Last but not least, we have Dr. Christine O'Connell. I forgot to put that on the flyer, by the way. Dr. Christine O'Connell from the Center for Communicating Science here at Stony Brook. So let's get So what we're going to do, and that's why I'm keeping my introduction relatively short, is that we want to hear from each of our panelists with an opening statement. And really the focus is on this communication. We want to hear a little bit about how they communicate hazardous weather information, to their constituents and so forth. And also it would be nice to get the discussion going and hearing from them about what they feel is a major roadblock right now in terms of that communication process. And that'll get us going, hopefully, for discussion. And so to lead off, I had sort of an order here. So I was actually going to start with Jason and then work our way to others.
Just before you begin, I am going to show you this if you need it. Panelists. It says 2 minutes, 1 minute.
That's just going to make them talk faster.
No, plenty of time.
Yeah. 10 minutes.
All right.
talk a little bit about weather service communications. And I think before we talk about where we're going, what our challenges are, you need to understand the state of communications within the weather service. And one, I really want to first divide this into two pieces and then acknowledge the critical role of the private sector. Because as much as I love our website and I love our Facebook, all our Facebook posts from our offices and Twitter, for some reason, it's not the most popular medium of communication. And we really rely on the private sector for the last mile. Because while I think our website's fabulous, most people still go and get their weather information from TV and the radio. So that's a critical part of the communications. And I first and foremost have to acknowledge the role of the private sector in making the last mile of communications work. But I really want to divide this, initially into looking at the technology of communications, because that's shifting constantly out from under us, and then the messaging. In terms of technology, we have the NWWS, that is the National Weather Service, the wire service, that is the official conduit for most of our products out to the media, the NOAA Weather Radio, with the strange robotic voice that everyone loves, which is a very important means of communication and actually has more penetration out there than I originally thought, thanks to some of the severe weather we've had recently. WEA, the wireless emergency alerts. How many people have cell phones, smartphones? Okay, how many people have been getting wireless emergency alerts? You have it turned on? Or I want to see more hands than that. But that for severe weather warnings really is a increasingly critical part of our communication strategy. We have the World Wide Web, we have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have YouTube, we have webinars, we have the phone. There's just a huge range of technology, and the technology is changing. And we're the government, and rumor has it the government is not the most nimble organization in the face of the earth, so it's really hard for us to keep up with the technology changes. So whenever we're talking about hazardous communications, we have to keep in mind the rate at which the technology of communications is changing and the challenges that presents to the government. On the messaging side, I'm a meteorologist. I am not a social scientist. So if you want to talk weather, I'm really good at talking weather. But if you want to talk about how people understand talking about weather, then I have to recognize my limitations. And this is one of the challenges that we have in the Weather Service. So we have a suite of official products that we've developed over the last 50 years. And they're really good. But as you're going to hear, they're probably not paragons of clarity in terms of communicating our information. Often they require help in interpreting what we're really trying to say. And one of the challenges, I'll just give you a challenge. How many people here, if I tell you, say there's a warning versus a watch, that you know what the difference is? Okay, that's pretty good. We've got a relatively sophisticated audience. Do you know that when we do social science polls, and we start asking people if they know the difference between warning and watch, that 50% of the people still don't get it right? And we've been trying to educate the public on this for the last 40 years. So what's the definition of insanity? Keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. So one of our challenges, and you're going to see this in a couple of slides, is how do we better communicate? What our intent is, what is impact, what drives action, what tells people they need to do things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our near-term communications initiatives. They're really expanding the regional operations center that's going to help basically harmonize some of the messaging between offices. Because one of the big challenges to communications is inconsistency. If people hear two different things, do they know what to do? Well, usually what they'll do is they'll wait until they get a third confirmation, and then they'll take action. Talk about the probabilistic snow experiment that we're going to be doing up the 95 corridor, and the New York office is going to be participating in that year. Hazard simplification, that whole problem about how to get rid of the watch warning paradigm. Standardizing emergency manager web pages and graphical hazardous weather outlook. All right. Right now, if you go out to our web pages, and let's say you're up in Buffalo right now, looking at forecasts of 50 to 60 inches of snow, you'll get what is our deterministic forecast, and it is the most likely outcome. And you know, right now we're putting it out in a pretty narrow range, but it's telling you what we think is going to happen. But as anyone who's tried to forecast snow knows, that you know, we're often off a little bit in our snow forecast. We do a good job, but we could do better. And what we're going to do this winter, starting 15 December, I believe, Ross, right?
December 1.
December 1. And I think we're rolling it out officially with the first forecast on the 15th, is the Eastern Region probabilistic snowfall. We did this experimentally down the Washington office. We're expanding it up the 95 corridor, all the way up through Boston. And what we're looking at is trying to communicate the range of possibilities using a lot of the ensemble-based science that the models are giving us. So we're going to try to communicate the minimum, expect at least this much. What's the official forecast, which is the most likely? And what's the maximum? What's the potential for the maximum amount of snow? In addition, we're going to give you probabilistic thresholds on exceedance values for 1/10 of an inch, 1 inch, 2 inch, 4 inches, 8 inches, and so on. And you can mouse over the website and see the probabilities. Now, this is going to be interesting, you know, and maybe this reflects my jaded view of trying to communicate. But we have a hard enough time, you know, communicating probability of precipitation to the general public. I don't know how we're going to do with exceedance values for a range of, you know, a probabilistic envelope of possibilities. So this is going to be interesting to see the feedback we get this winter. In addition, we'll have tables with towns in the local area that gives you the same probabilities in a tabular format. So this is a big initiative because it's going to really allow us to do risk-based communications in terms of snowfall. And we'll see how this works this winter. Okay, hazard simplification. We all know that we have a hard time communicating watch and warning. And if you look at the Weather Service websites, unfortunately, we are not the models for standardization across all our different websites. You know, here's an example where you just have all these different colors on our websites, and depending on what you're looking at, it all means different things. You think we'd standardize our color curves, and this really creates a lot of confusion. What we're trying to do is simplify the messaging so people can actually take away what's really important. What's the impact? What do I have to worry about? When it's going to occur? What's the likelihood? And we're borrowing you know, some work that's been done over in Europe with Meteo France and the UK Met Office in terms of their meteor alarms. So here's an example where you take one of our text products, which is a blizzard warning and winter storm warning, and you try to communicate the whole thing in terms of a black, red, orange, and yellow color scale, telling people exactly what they have to worry about, what's the impact, and where it's going to have, where it's going to occur, and then what time it's going to occur. Another way to do this is doing this with a color scale on a map, and you actually can have warnings in red, that's really red, not orange, and advisories, which they call be aware, in yellow. And then simplify it in terms of risk tables, which risk-based decision makers are used to seeing, and actually put the likelihood and impact in terms of the occurrence. So this is a different way of looking at it, and we think this has a lot of possibility in really communicating threat and likelihood in an unambiguous manner. Another way to do this is our beloved front page of the Weather Service homepage. Again, trying to simplify the map in terms of reducing the number of colors and basically communicating threat and likelihood in terms of color scale. And we'll go back. You can see that here's an example where you put a threat level orange, and it tells you exactly what you have to be worried about without all the text and complicated warnings messaging that we have. It really simplifies the messaging. The last thing I'm going to talk about is a graphical hazardous weather outlook, which is kind of borrowing the meteor alarm approach. This is going to be implemented in the eastern region this year. It's trying to take our hazardous weather outlook, which is a text product right now, and display it graphically, again, communicating threat and likelihood for a whole array of possible weather conditions. So the challenges, what do I see the challenges facing us overall? One, we had to clear up our messaging. If we can do it graphically, that's even better, but it has to be simple, unambiguous, it has to drive decisions and actions. And the other thing we have is we have competing and overlapping communications challenges. We have all these, I just gave you a whole laundry list of different technologies we're using to communicate. We have to make sure that the messaging is clear and everyone tailored for each communication channel. And we have to make sure that the forecast and warning information is always up to date and representative. Nothing damages your credibility more and creates confusion in the public if that information is up to date. We have a big challenge overall in communicating probability and uncertainty. As I mentioned, the public doesn't even understand probability of precip. So how are we going to start communicating ensemble information and uncertainty information to the public, which is really where we want to go, as a National Academy study pointed out almost a decade ago. And then lastly, one of the challenges we have is the increasing overlap between the messaging between the Weather Service and the private sector. Now, the private sector has a very important role to play. We have private weather enterprise companies that deliver tailored forecasts and warnings to a lot of individual customers. But with social media and the increasing communications channels, what we're seeing is bleed over from their intended audience to the general public. So I personally know of at least 3 instances where we've had tornado warnings in the last 3 years now, where the Weather Service had out a different warning or no warning at all, and the private sector put out a warning that got out into the general public, and then people start saying, well, what do I do? These guys are saying warning, the Weather Service isn't. Who do I believe? This is going to be just an overarching challenge, I think, over the next decade, as we have the different communications channels and the increasing overlap between the private sector and the governmental sector. So, that's where I'll leave you and tee up some good things for discussion.
Thank you. Great, thank you. So we keep with the forecasting thing. I think I'll ask Rich Hoffman maybe to come up next.
So my name is Rich Hoffman. I work at News 12 Long Island, and for those who also don't know, I'm also a college professor at Farmingdale State College, teaching intro to meteorology for the last 10 years. And some of the things that I've learned from teaching college and speaking to the youth of America now, that I like to call, since I'm getting a little older, understanding on how it goes from my mouth on television to how my students are receiving their information. And one of the things that is definitely growing is how it goes from television to a cell phone very quickly. So in my aspect of communication, I'm learning, well, people aren't necessarily turning on the TV anymore, so how can we get those important weather information and that data out to the people who are relying on us, especially whether it's a major snowstorm or whether it's a Sandy situation or an Irene situation. And this is our weather team. For those people who don't know, Samantha is our newest member. She's already been there for 5 years. She was my intern back in 2007. We have Norm Navoskin, who is now in his 80s, and he's been doing weather on Long Island for 40+ years with a lot of very useful information, a lot of jokes, and a lot of different perspective on how we can get his communication aspect out to the public as well. And our chief meteorologist, Bill Forbell, who has been forecasting weather for the government, radio, and television for more than 50 years now as well. So we have a pretty good entrenched weather team all on Long Island, understanding what's happening here. And especially the situation that came with Sandy, trying to communicate of, hey, it's now in my backyard, what do I need to do? So once upon a time when a major storm comes, we have to be prepared. A lot of people turn on the TV, and what makes News 12 now different, if you don't have cable vision, is that when you go to click on, you need some sort of power. So this is what a lot of people saw when Sandy was coming down. And since Sandy, we've started changing some of the ways or making our ways better to communicate with the public. So when people had no power, they had no signal, they couldn't watch us. So a couple of things that we started to do was interacting more with social media, also refining and retuning the way people can get us online, on the internet, through your cell phones, and pretty substantial upgrades to our weather apps and also how you could watch online streaming. So a couple of things of getting my point out, my weather forecast, my team's weather forecast, is how we use our website now, how we use our access to weather apps, what we're doing on social media. That is the next big thing. My college students, they barely turn on the TV anymore, and one of the first things that most people are reaching for now, before they hit their alarm or they're using their alarm, is their cell phones. So we have to figure out a way of how we can jazz that information up and make sure it's upgraded or updated in a very timely fashion. Another thing, since we're not always on, if the power's out, we also have contracts with local radio stations, which came in very handy during Sandy, that we were able to broadcast and stay on radio stations as well. So a couple of things, I'll show you how we're communicating a little better and upgrading our service to people, is that we have the iPad app and the iPhone app, and just actually in the last 2 weeks, we now have an Android app. Believe it or not, I guess sometimes we don't believe in Android over Apple, so we're improving. And if you've ever been to our News 12 website, you can see up on the right-hand side here, it says News 12 Live and Traffic and Weather Live. We have a very good streaming service now that our signal over the internet sometimes is much better than if you turn on your cable box. And it takes up little data on your cell phone, so it's one of the aspects that we're able to get out a lot better. So you're able to watch us online, getting out our weather communication, okay, and on your cell phone, your app, your iPad, whatever it's going to be. And it's very interesting now that more people, as far as like my nieces and nephews' ages, who are 18 to 23, are watching me more live on their cell phone and their app than on a cable box. And one of the things that Cablevision and Optimal Online, if you are a subscriber, I know I'm sounding a little bit like a commercial, but Wi-Fi. We have over 1 million Wi-Fi spots now. So if you have a cell phone, you hook up to Wi-Fi, it streams a lot faster, you don't take up your data. And that was one of the things that I know in my neighborhood, where I didn't have power, I was able to latch on to a Wi-Fi spot and be able to get out the weather communication. So for us here at News 12 now, one of the things we're doing now is trying to update hourly forecast through social media, on our website. You can see on the top where, very similar if you want to go to the National Weather Service, one of the things we're working with our weather company, which is WSI, outside of Boston, is how we can zoom into everyone's neighborhood. It used to be how much snow or when is it going to rain in my neighborhood. So we're using a lot more Google Maps, which you can now get on your cell phones and apps. So that's one of the ways that we're doing our information. On the top right-hand corner here, we have now what we call Weather Extra. That's where our meteorologists are breaking down the forecast and doing more of what we call, similar to the National Weather Service, a forecast discussion. More details than, hey, the high is going to be this, the low is going to be this. This is where our meteorologists can, when we have time, to break down a storm. For the weather techie stuff or the weather geeky stuff, talking about 850 millibar levels, what's going on with the jet stream, different information that people can understand, which you can also get cell phones, or if you're not watching online, get it on the internet. And this is, for example, something very quickly I talked about the other day about the heavy rain that we were going to have yesterday, and then the impending cold weather that we're going to have today. And a lot of these weather maps I'm very grateful, very thankful that the National Weather Service has become more active, better graphics, and making them more simplified. And you can see on this one map, years ago you didn't have many maps that had, okay, this is blue for snow, this is green for rain, and now because of that, it makes my job a little bit easier. So I've been working a lot with the social media aspect of downloading these apps and getting together with the National Weather Service on Twitter and Facebook. And the interaction between the Weather Service and myself has been much better of communication that people hands-on now through social media and communicating back and forth on Facebook of getting the message out. This is our News 12 Now Facebook page that, you know, if I mention something on air, they're able to put it on a Facebook page or a Twitter page to get that interaction. A lot of people now, instantaneous, hey, I have an image, where can I put it? You can put it on our Facebook page, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. And for example, this is just one of the old pages I want to show. This is a great image that the National Weather Service put up. If a lot of people don't go to the National Weather Service Facebook page, you're not going to see this information. So I try to get this information and spread it through social media, and also on our website, so people can understand what's happening. We're trying to drill them more than once, whether it's my Facebook, Twitter, my company's Facebook, Twitter, whether it's on news12.com, or whether it's on the air. You need to hit people several times before they get it. This time of year, I like to call it rumor season. I heard it's going to snow. I heard this. I heard that. Well, where did you hear that from? Our information now, thanks to the internet, it's logged. It's there day after day after day. So that's one of the things that we go back and look at with information. This is going back to Sandy. Images on social media. I took the images from the National Weather Service, the government, put it on my Facebook page, whether my images that we created on air, to go back and forth to try to understand what's going on. This information is great, but when I ask my friends, do you know what this means? They're like, no. And that's when we take some of the information and try to put it better in pictures. And it wasn't until we started getting pictures with damage that people were saying, okay, this is what's happening. On the top right here in the corner here, this is an image from Battle Village. I live about a block and a half from where this is. This is Montauk Highway. I've never seen 3 feet of water in Montauk Highway. It wasn't until some of these images, the top left here one is from my friend who's a Battle Village firefighter, that the water was 3 feet deep and houses were on fire, that people said, I think I need to evacuate now. And thanks to social media, we wouldn't have gotten these images 5 to 10 years ago. So that's one of the things that I'm working on, also interviewing my students at college on, hey, how did you know about this? So I'm working with my students, I'm working with my friends, fire departments in the area, to say, how can we spread this information to make sure that it's on social media, it's on television. Honestly, it doesn't matter if it's on channel 2, 4, 7, wherever, so people can see it and evacuate. That was the biggest thing. I was here during Sandy. Well, did you flood? No. We have images now that show you need to get out of there as fast as you can. And the other thing that we have over the last several years, whether it's a blizzard or major event, we have our information simulcast over radio stations. So that's another way that News 12 is trying to get the information out, as well as myself, that how can we get the information out there 2, 3, 4 times, take the information from the government. While I'm a good source as a meteorologist for doing it almost 20 years, the government has a bigger staff than we do at News 12. So I try to take their information and get it in different spots. So that's where I'll wrap up now. Hopefully, you guys can understand of trying to get that information out. And if you have any questions, we'll talk on the panel in a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Rich. It was really interesting to see the interaction in social media between the Weather Service and their News 12. That was awesome. So now we've got the forecast side, and I think the next logical thing is working our way to the emergency managers in here. So maybe we'll start with David. Is that one here from Nassau County?
I don't.
That's fine.
I know you're all disappointed I don't have a PowerPoint. First of all, I just want to thank the Weather Service, Stony, Brook, really for putting this together tonight and inviting us. It's really a pleasure to be here to see all of you. And after being downstairs and having a couple of slices of pizza and soda and speaking to some of the folks and looking at this facility here and the impressive room that we were in before, and hearing all this great scientific talk. I do apologize, I think I'm the only English major in the room. Okay. Also, that's true. Any other English majors here? Liberal arts majors?
It's probably a
Okay, no, all right. Next thing I'd like to say is I am here representing Nassau County Office of Emergency Management, where I am employed. And one of the reasons I'm representing Nassau County tonight is because during Hurricane Irene, Superstorm Nemo, Snowstorm Nemo, and Superstorm Sandy, I was spent the time of those storms in the Suffolk County Office of Emergency Management, EOC. But, I used to work for New York State OEM, so I was in Suffolk for those events. What do we do in Nassau County when there's a weather event coming? Well, first of all, again, and thanks to the National Weather Service, especially to Gary and Ross and Jeff and all you forecasters out there, first thing we do, we start calling around. And you always know if there's going to be a storm coming or weather coming, Gary's going to get to us and he's going to arrange a conference call. And I guess we do things the old-fashioned way in Nassau County. First thing we do, we get on a conference call with Gary. Gary gives us his opinion. 90% of the time it's Gary. And he gives us his opinion. He gives us his forecast, what's going to be. We make a decision whether or not we think that the forecast comes up to the level that we're going to activate our EOC. EOC is Emergency Operations Center, for those of you who don't know. And it's really based on Gary's forecast. So the next thing we do after we get Gary's forecast and we make a determination about how we're going to set up for the emergency, we get a conference call with the cities, towns, and villages of the county. We also get a conference call with the PD, with the DOT, with the county executive's office, and a few other of the agencies. And in saying that, I just want to recognize one of the local emergency managers from Nassau County who is with us tonight. Len Simons from the town of Oyster Bay is here, and I know he, like me, Len traveled and his wife traveled a long way to get here. Okay. Hope we find, did you leave breadcrumbs? We can find our way back to Nassau? Okay. That's the first thing we do. So we say, okay, we're getting a storm, whether it's a snowstorm, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a thunderstorm, tornado, whatever, we're going to activate the EOC. So we make our call outs. We bring in whoever we think we're going to need, probably the county DOT, county police. We're going to call the state. We're going to get the state police into our EOC. We're going to get the power company, both power companies that we have now, the gas company and the electric company. We're going to get them there, no matter what the emergency is. That's usually the #1 problem that the average citizen is going to have, right? 2 problems. Going to be the roads and the utilities. So those are the first 2 people we get out there, DOT and the utility companies, right? Sometimes things are so bad, storms of such magnitude are underway, that we ask to get a meteorologist embedded in our EOC. And again, Ross, Gary, you guys have been wonderful. We've had tactical meteorologists embedded in our EOC for Irene and Sandy. And I think maybe for Nemo as well. Although Nemo kind of snuck up on us. In a non-emergency situation, on a normal day when there's not an emergency, a lot of stuff goes on in our county. We have, in the summertime, we have concerts, we have events, we have outdoor events, indoor events. We're going to call up the weather service. We're going to say, Gary, I don't know, it looks a little iffy out there. We have a concert in the park. We're expecting 10,000 people at Eisenhower Park tomorrow night. What are we going to do? And we're going to rely on them. And we're going to make the recommendation to the county executive whether or not to cancel the concert. And we canceled the concert this year on a Saturday night. It was a good thing because the weather was terrible. And if we had 10,000 people in Eisenhower Park and a thunderstorm, a severe thunderstorm came up in the middle of the concert with people who had to run for cover, run for their cars, they're sitting under trees, there's all sorts of electrical equipment on the stage, it would not have been a pretty sight. And again, these are the type of things that we rely on communication with the Weather Service for. Okay? Every day, we send out a weather brief in Nassau County. We send out a brief to all the elected officials and all the town and city emergency managers. Where do we get our weather information from? We get it from the National Weather Service. Every day that goes out to hundreds of people within Nassau County and local government in our county. And on a final note, the final thing we do is, and Gary and Ross will both know from since I've been in the county and also when I worked in the state, I have never been shy about picking up the phone and calling for a personal forecast from the National Weather Service Upton office. And I will tell you, okay, that is the most old-fashioned way, and it's still the best way. And we are blessed on this island to have such great folks in the Weather Service that will pick up the phone, talk to us, and really, you know, sometimes calm our panic when we think something is really bad. They kind of tell us what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and it lets us prepare our county for the event. Again, I really want to thank you guys for all the help that you've been for me for my 15, 16 years that I've been down here doing emergency management. So thanks again, and again, thanks for having us.
Okay, well, thank you, David. Next, I guess we'll hear from Suffolk County with Edward Schneyer.
Good evening, folks. Well, you might be interested to know, or at least comforted to know, that a lot of what we do in Suffolk mirrors what Nassau does, as well as New York City and Westchester. Those four regional jurisdictions get together, we collaborate regularly. In fact, I was in the city today for a meeting with all of them. And we share best practices, and all of our plans kind of mirror each other. So everything Dave said, I agree with, and I echo his thoughts. I also echo his thoughts and comments about the National Weather Service. One thing I'd like to add, a couple things I'd like to add. I know there's some emergency managers who look at a variety of different weather sources. And before they send out information, they'll create their own weather prediction from a variety of sources. We don't do that, okay? The National Weather Service is our primary source and our only source. What they say is what we follow. And that's something that we stick to all the time. We do go on the conference calls, much like David mentioned. The PowerPoint briefings that they put out are excellent. We send them out, we have a distribution list with literally thousands of emails. And we also fax them out to firehouses, EMS agencies, all the local jurisdictions, the towns and villages, so we get the best distribution. We also put them up on social media. We run on social media. We run Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. There are some challenges with that, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Our goal is to maintain situational awareness as much as possible. We keep our upper level management, the county executive and his office, updated constantly on the situational awareness, as well as the folks that we're responsible to in the local townships and villages. We follow a 120-hour timeline, which I believe Nassau does also. So does New York City and Westchester. And the reason I mention this is, in this 120-hour timeline, if we're looking at, let's say it's a coastal storm event, we're monitoring it from 5 days out, okay? And it's like a checklist that we follow, and all of our checklists are very, very similar. And what it does is it forces us to make decisions. And there's trigger points within those categories of days and hours, and talking about evacuations, whether it's hospitals, special needs folks, or the general public. And there's actual trigger points within that 120-hour timeline. We all basically follow a similar timeline. So that's important to know, and that's important to understand. We don't just pull these things out of a hat and just start taking actions. There's a thought process to the decision making. So some of the challenges that we see in the communication portion of it, and I mentioned the social media end of it. From the government side, in my opinion, the government is somewhat, we're always behind the 8 ball when it comes to the technology. We're talking about smartphones. There's folks, the mainstream public has been out working with smartphones and the technology for years. They've been heading down that superhighway, and to be honest with you, we just got smartphones. Okay, so we're just getting on the highway. So we're catching, we have to get up to speed. So there's a lot of problems there with trying to keep up with the technology. I think Jason mentioned it earlier about governments trying to keep up with the technology as it changes. It changes so quickly. So those are the challenges that we face down the road with the smartphones, the apps. There's so much stuff out there that we just have to get up to speed on it, and we're working on that. It's gonna take a little bit of time, but there's a lot of important information that's being given out there, and the things that Richard mentioned are outstanding, and we need more progressive action and just to keep moving forward with that technology. That's all I have.
Well, thank you, Edward. Last but not least, we have Dr. Christine O'Connell, who will talk to us a little bit about the science of communication. Right?
Hi, everyone.
If you get the PowerPoint on the very bottom,
There we go. Oh, yes, now it is. Hi, everyone. So I'm coming at this from a little bit of a different perspective. Sorry, I hate standing behind a podium. Can everybody hear me in the back? Okay, then I'm not going to stand behind the podium. So what we do at the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science is we work with scientists. And we work with scientists on teaching them how to communicate their science better. And I am a scientist. I actually got my PhD in Marine and Atmospheric Sciences from the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences across the street. So from a scientist perspective, I can tell you we need to communicate it better. How many people in the room are emergency managers? How many people are scientists? Okay, good amount. How many people are students? And how many members of the general public are there? Okay, all right. So there's a good mix of people here tonight. I'm asking everybody, even the scientists out there, how many of you, when you've heard a scientist talking about their science and what they do and their research, have understood or have not understood everything you've been hearing? Raise your hand. And maybe been frustrated with it, right? How many of you wanted to understand more but didn't? And worked hard? This is every science meeting I ever go to. I try. I don't think it's okay that at science meetings I'm okay with only understanding 60 to 70% of it, even in my field. We need to do a better job of communicating, and that's why the center was started. And what we do is these workshops across the country. We also have a bunch of graduate classes here at Stony Brook to work with graduate students in all the different disciplines, from physics to atmospheric sciences, chemistry to biology, even in medical professions, to talk to people, to talk to the general public so they understand. And this is even more important when we're talking about atmospheric science and what you do. So why is science communication important when it comes to communicating about weather, communicating about climate, science, and extreme weather in particular? Why is it important? Safety, health. Whether or not you need to evacuate. Why else?
property damage.
Property damage, people care about it for that reason. Why else?
Fill up the gas tank.
All right, but we want to know when to fill up the gas tank. These are all important reasons and important to the general public, right? So one of the things that scientists struggle with the most and what we see across disciplines is figuring out a way to make their science interesting to the general public, to make them care. And we call this the big so what. In climate science, it's inherently interested, and you should use that. People care about this because it's important to their health, it's important to their house, it's important to whether they're going to get to work in the morning, it's important whether they have to wear a coat or a scarf the next day. They want to know about it. It's important to make decisions from all the people here on the panel that are actually making decisions for the county, for the town, on what's going on. So we see the same problems across disciplines, and I'm just going to talk about a few of them. But one of our big points is distilling your message, is teaching scientists how to talk about science in clear conversational ways, why it matters, using vivid language, everyday language that people understand. Seems simple, right? But it's not. We all get caught in our own jargon. If you're a scientist and you're talking to someone in the business world, and they're talking about what they do in their jargon, you're not going to understand it, right? Or even emergency managers, you have your own jargon. Heard somebody up here talking in emergency management jargon that as a scientist said, okay. So we all have our own jargon, and it's trying to figure out what that is and identify those things so we can better talk to each other and to the public. Another big piece of it is talking in clear, vivid imagery, painting pictures for people. This is really important. People remember in terms of images. If you can create a picture in someone's head with your words, they're going to be more likely to remember it. Also creating emotion, having emotion attached to what you're saying. And this is something a lot of scientists shy away from. We want to keep emotion out of it. But I'm not talking about emotion in terms of, we need to do this now, right? But weather is inherently emotional. It's interesting. It creates awe in people. It's exciting to people, even a thunderstorm. So it's inherently there. So it's figuring out a way to tap into that. Because if you have an emotion attached to something, it's really important. And people, again, remember it. You remember things when there's an emotion attached. But there's a double edge to that, especially with communicating weather. Because on the media aspect, it tends to get overblown with emotion. I mean, how many snowpocalypses did we have this past winter, right? So it's about being realistic with that image, with that emotion as well, and being able to communicate that. But don't shy away from it. I had a student that I was working with who was a medical researcher. And he told me that on Thanksgiving, when he's talking to his family and friends, instead of telling people that he's a cancer researcher, which he is a cancer researcher, he started telling people he is a cell biologist. Because the word cancer researcher had too much emotion attached to it, and it trivialized his research. And I think a lot of people, especially involved in climate science, feel the same way. What you do inherently has emotion tied to it because it's something that affects everybody, and it's something that does get blown up in the media sometimes, so you're scared to put that emotion attached to it. But really, it's what people are responding to, and it's what people are thinking already. So if you don't do it, they're automatically going there. So it's about doing it in an appropriate way. Two of the big things we always stress, and that across disciplines we find this same problem, is knowing your audience and knowing your goal. Knowing your audience is so important when trying to figure out how to communicate about science, any kind of science, especially climate science. Because the way you're going to talk to an elderly person and try and reach out to an elderly person in the storm is going to be very different than the way you're going to reach out to a student and using smartphones. And it's something that people up here put a lot of thought into. It's going to be very different than speaking to your neighbor. So knowing your audience, knowing what interests them, what they're going to respond to. Are they going to care about evacuating because they don't want to leave their cats? Do they care about not evacuating or are they not evacuating because they don't have a place to go? Are they scared about somebody breaking into their house? Knowing your audience and knowing what they care about will help you tailor your messages to them. But also knowing your goal, understanding what the most important goal is, what you're trying to get across. And this happens all the time. We forget we forget to think about the people we're talking to. So we need to know what do they want to know? What do they need to know from us? Not to what do we want to tell them? And try and find that medium in between. And one of the things I like to always point out is get to the point early. In science, we are trained to think like that triangle on the left there. We are trained to think that way. We write our papers that way. We think that way. We give the background first. Well, in order to know this, you kind of need to know this. In order to know that, you kind of need to know that. And then we get into the supporting details, and right at the very end, we have a few paragraphs in the results conclusion, maybe in the discussion there, right? The general public thinks the exact opposite of that. How do you decide what you want to read every morning in the newspaper? What do you do first? Headlines. You look at the headlines, right? The headlines is the so what. You have to give people the so what first. You have to engage them. Give them the so what. Get them to want to know more, and then you can get into the supporting details. Even if people don't ask for the so what, for the bottom line, what does this mean to me? They're thinking it. And then another thing I always stress is the importance of using concrete examples and concrete analogies, metaphors, anything that can paint a picture. I want you to read this for a second. This is not a weather example, but I think it relates. Voyager 1, which was launched in 1977 and has reached interstellar space, has only 68 kilobytes of computer memory. Who knows what Voyager 1 is? The spaceship that was launched over 30 years ago. So it's still going, and it's still sending back data to Nassau. And this spaceship that just left our solar system has only 68 kilobytes of computer memory. That's small, right? The smallest iPod has an 8 gigabyte iPod Nano has 100,000 times more memory than what is on this spacecraft. What sticks in your head more?
The number.
The 68 kilobytes, or the comparison? The comparison. So anytime, even though we all know 68 kilobytes is small, right? We get that that's small. But putting it in a comparison drives the point home. And even for us who know how small that is, it really makes it stick. So anytime you can give a comparison, you can create a metaphor, it's going to stick in people's heads better. I heard a great one about climate change and extreme weather events. And this is something we're hearing from scientists a lot in terms of how do we explain that, how do we deal with questions about is this storm was sandy because of climate change and because of global warming? And a great metaphor or a great comparison that I heard regarding that is about basketball. Who here has seen a basketball game? Who's here has been to a basketball game? Okay, so saying a storm is caused by climate change is like taking a basketball game. Go to any high school basketball game. Taking the nets and lowering the nets a foot. And then saying any one basket, any basket that's made, can you say that was caused by lowering that net a foot? No, it's really hard to say that because there's lots of other factors that go into it, right? But overall, are there going to be more baskets made? Yes, a good percentage, right? So saying things like that, putting things in terms for people that they can understand, that create pictures for them in their heads, are a great way to get those points across so they remember it. And if I can leave you with anything tonight, it's that point of using and creating images and using comparisons, metaphors, especially around extreme weather, because people forget. They forget from year to year, especially with storms. It was icy out tonight when I was walking to my car and I almost slipped. By the end of the winter, I'm going to be a pro at walking across ice because I'm thinking about it and I know that there's going to be ice out there. So reminding people, okay, the first snowstorm of the season, it's huge, big deal, right? But by the end of the season, all right, it's just more snow. So reminding people, we do this every year. We have snow every year. This is a similar snowstorm to last year that we have gotten. Reminding them of that, creating that visual for them is going to be really helpful. So I'll leave you at that, and thank you.
Thank you, Chrissy. I'm going to take her. I'm going to stand out here. I like that too. Thank you, panel, for your opening statements. So that was our first hour. What we're going to do now is kind of transition to our question and answer and so forth. And I'm going to try and keep things organized, because I think the first part we want to do, kind of distilling our message, so to speak, is really trying to get at the problem. Kind of what you view as, you've all listed kind of some of the roadblocks and challenges, for example, but I want to kind of narrow that down, or at least if we had to rank them, as kind of what you feel are the major, what is the major roadblocks? For example, if we have another major event like a Sandy or something, what are the existing roadblocks you think that may prevent this communication, all the way from the forecast process to the emergency managers and then out to the public, and then even in the science communication? I mean, how are we doing in that frame? So I'm going to open up with that, but I want you guys to think of questions or something related to the problem of communication. That'll be the first part of our discussion, and then we'll transition to kind of ways we can address some of these problems and be creative like that. So is anyone thinking about a real roadblock? I mean, something that right now that could cause a big problem, thinking about the next storm event? Or is everything fine? We're just
Okay, is this on? I think,
it may need to be
Turn it on.
turned on. I can close it.
all right. Well, I think, we heard,
Green light.
all right, the green light's on, so theoretically it's working, right? Again, one of the hazardous to communication is the power on. I'm going to distill actually what I heard from the emergency managers. They like the one-on-one communication. They like the briefings. They like having weather service embedded at their EOCs when they need the support, because they need that clear, unambiguous communication, which is great. However, we cannot put one of our meteorologists in every home on Long Island. Just don't have the budget, nor the people. So the challenge is the gap between the support we give to our emergency managers and then what the public receives, and that's why we depend so much on the private media. I think our challenge on the Weather Service side, if you look at our official products, they're very complex, they're very long, they're very hard to understand. You look at our hurricane local statement during hurricanes, which is often 5 or 6 pages long. Talk about not getting to the point right away. I think that's a good example of maybe one of our more inefficient communications. A lot of our winter storm warnings tend to be, when you print them out in the text products, are pages long because of the complexity of covering both geographic space and time in a text product. And people are visually oriented. So we're trying to move that. So this is this dilemma of the support we provide to the governmental decision makers versus the level of support we can provide directly to the public. What we started doing, trying to bridge this gap, is putting a lot of the same briefings we give to the emergency managers, or a subset of those briefings, out on our Facebook pages. So we're trying to overcome that barrier. But our legacy products, which we're still trying to transition out of a text-based world,
That's
leave
what
a lot to be desired.
Curious, how many get information from the Weather Service via Facebook, where you actually get social media type, right? So, it's a fraction.
Yes.
And then how many are getting from standard text? I mean, where you're, National Weather Service, text forecast and the clickable map, right? Things like that. So that actually looks like the majority right now. I mean, there's actually a strong age dependence here.
Yeah, we've noticed that.
And so forth. So, but that kind of highlights the problem, right? So,
In talking about the National Weather Service, I think one of the problems is you guys have a lot of great products, but they're hidden. There's a couple of things I use to show my students, like the quick forecast. Hour by hour, day by day, click, it's right there. The new stuff that's coming out, the experimental stuff. There's a lot of good information that's out there for whether the older, if you want to call it the older generation to the younger generation, but sometimes it's hidden. And that's where the communication gets lost sometimes. And I know, thanks to social media, I can't thank the National Weather Service lately enough with social media, with the easy-to-use graphics, the videos. because it reinforces my things that I'm saying on television, and we go back and forth. It's always nice in a news story if you have two sources. Well, if I have the National Weather Service saying the same thing I'm saying, and vice versa, we have more credibility together. And, you know, Gary and the rest of your crew, you know, some of the social media people have been doing a fantastic job. Some people it's getting to, some people it's not. But the, you know, the one thing what Christine talks about, the sexy words in media, the polar vortex, snowmageddon, the headline. I cringe every time I hear these words. But on the other side, at least people are talking about it and it brings awareness. So it's a double-edged sword of, at least they know something's coming. And there's one thing that I think of as opposed to my 25-year-old producer who wants to say something else. What's going to grab the most eyeballs and ears when we're on television? So we try to get that happy medium of what's going on. There's the dire words of whether it's Katrina back in 2005 or it's Sandy, of some of the verbiage from the National Weather Service. It's hard sometimes to say, if you don't leave, you're going to die. And that's one of the things that, what's the strong words that people will listen to? Or, oh, I was in a storm like this before and nothing happened. Well, it just takes that one time for something to happen. So I thank the Weather Service on all their products that they have, you know, especially that I've been finding more lately, and using the social media to get to people a little bit quicker and, you know, reinforcing the statement that hopefully, you know, with all the things that are changing weather, that there are more amateur meteorologists out there, and hopefully that people use the Weather Service and, you know, the science and the education stuff that's also there, whether it's the local National Weather Service, the national group, the Storm Prediction Center, and even the AMS. They have great online teaching guides for if anybody knows any teachers. They have, you know, there's a lot of science education that can go back and forth of where you can educate yourself and then educate your friends to either A, not panic, or hey, this is a serious situation, you gotta go.
So when you're in front of the camera, who are you imagining you're talking to? What age group, what socioeconomic group, what educational level?
It's changed over the years. A television consultant years ago told me to act like I'm talking to a third grader.
Third grade.
A third grader. You know, and then it's like talk like you're talking to an eighth grader. And then sometimes we do get caught up in a moment and we start talking fast and we get excited and so forth. And that's not because we're trying to have a situation, we're just excited in general about weather. And sometimes it is difficult to make sure and reinforce that what audience we continue to talk to. Like our consultants, you know, or not the ones at News 12, but other ones I've dealt with over the years, the education level, you want to go one step below what you think it may be. This way, everyone can understand it, because you're not sure who's watching. And if the lowest person can watch, that means the top person is able to watch.
We just heard that the younger generation, the student generation, is using Facebook. So has that altered the audience that you see?
Well, I'm disappointed in the generation from the students I've been teaching, because the initiative behind of some of the things they're doing. I guess I'm judging a little bit too on a personal level, where my mom now has a smartphone, and the things that she can do now is that I'm seeing, my mom's 68, so I'm seeing the things that she can do and her friends can do, and I try to adjust of what I'm teaching in college and also what I'm doing on the internet. Norm Dvoski, who's 85 years old, or 84, I think exactly who works with us, he's able to do Twitter, Facebook, and some of the other basic aspects as well. So we try to do a little bit of both, that we can get to, you know, all levels of, you know, user-friendly science, technology, smartphones, or whatever the case may be.
So I want to hear from maybe Dave or Edward about a major roadblock on the OEM side. You're obviously getting, you know, very personal information from the Weather Service, and Gary's very busy and so forth. But you know, thinking about storms and so forth, I mean, what are some of the issues that you face that in terms of getting that information and communicating it?
My experience with the Weather Service,
You just need volume. It may not mean.
I don't think it does work.
It's on, but we need to figure out volume.
In my experience with the Weather Service, there is not, I don't see any problem with getting sufficient and accurate weather information into government, okay? But again, like we all were talking about, is disseminating that information to the population. You know, that's, I would say, you know, more people probably get their weather from News 12 than any other source on Long Island, by far. Because a lot of times, you know, you'll meet people, well, the guy on Channel 12 said that it's going to be such and such. What do you think? Well, I said, well, if the guy from Channel 12 says it, who am I to, you know, to not agree with what he said? So we're really not in the business of getting that information to the public on the emergency medicine side. We're trying to get it to other governmental agencies.
You know, David, I think one of the roadblocks, quite frankly, because I know the elected officer is to educate the decision makers.
Right.
Because that's really, it's really a huge problem. You have the information from Ross and Gary and Jeff and crew, but now to translate that information into understandable, clear, concise terms to the decision maker really becomes a problem. I have a lifelong passion for meteorology. I understand it, but I can name, and I'm not going to name any names here tonight, I can name some high-end people who, quite frankly, don't have a clue. That is a
And they are depending on someone else to guide them in making what could be very important decisions, whether to close the school, whether to cancel the concert, whether to call for evacuation.
When Mayor Bloomberg on Saturday morning on Sandy gets on the air and makes a statement in comparison to Sandy and Irene, not going to be as bad, somehow, and the OEM of the city is you know, they're top people, they're fantastic. But somehow the information didn't get to the mayor, who ultimately has to make that important decision on evacuation and other situations to address.
That's one thing I was curious about is, I mean, there's uncertainty in these storms, right? And so how do you communicate that uncertainty, you know?
Well, to me, and I think we all agree, it's better to err on the side of caution. A lot of times, they keep, you know, school is canceled on what we recommend, and it doesn't snow. We blame the weather service. But that's a lot better. The other side is when there is school,
Yeah.
and you can't get your kids out.
So
We're used to that.
I just want to give Edward and also Christine a comment before we turn it over to the audience for some more questions on this.
One of the things we always stress is that communication, actually, we talk about giving people information all the time, and it's something, I've worked with policymakers a lot. I've actually been on the policy side and getting information from scientists on how to make and making a decision. It's hard to make those leaps sometimes because there is so much uncertainty. But I think people get scared away by the term uncertainty, so they just don't, they ignore it or they don't talk about it. And I think it's important when talking about uncertainty to clarify it. Is this going to be like this storm last year, or is this going to be like this event? But to also clarify that it is uncertain. If you say 70% chance of something happening, means there's still a 30% chance that it won't. And that's uncertainty there. And we're not sure which will happen. And it's important, I think, to communicate that to the general public too. So if it's wrong, if school is closed, well, we were erring on the side of caution, but there was still a 30% chance that it's not going to happen. You can wear your seatbelt every day in the car and not get in a car accident, but if you get in a car accident, you're going to be happy you were wearing your seatbelt. And what are the chances of those kind of things? So making those comparisons for people. But our main point is that communication only occurs when the person you're talking to actually receives the message you're getting. If you're just talking and they're not getting it, it's not communication. And I think it's something that's important important to remember, especially in these situations.
You want to say a few words, or?
Yeah, I think when it comes to that part of the communication, the trying to explain to the public officials, that's where the emergency manager comes in. Okay, typically it's years of experience. These folks are not, they don't change on a regular basis. They're usually there for a length of time, have the experience. We have a rapport with the National Weather Service. If the county executive or one of his subordinates was to sit in on a conference call and he heard Gary Conti talk about a decaying convective current, he wouldn't know what it is, and I wouldn't know what it is, but I would call Gary and say, what is that? And the key thing here is he didn't say warning, he didn't use the word warning. Okay, so we have to try to convey that message to public officials. There are times, there's the National Weather Service website has so much stuff on it, as Rich mentioned. You can dig in there forever and you forget how you got to where you got. That's one of the issues with it, but we know where to find the stuff we need to look at. There's a number of things they recently, when I say recently, within the past 2 years, came up with the emergency managers page, which has a lot of good stuff on it. It helps reduce the amount of digging that we have to go through to find what we're looking for. The hourly weather graph is something that we use constantly. Okay, that's something that we'll look at constantly throughout the event. There's a lot of good information that's jam-packed in there, and it's also a visual aid to some extent.
Now I want to hear from you. Any questions or comments regarding the problem here? We're trying to define the problem of communication. Anything that we missed in terms of outlining this? So forth. Yeah, we'll start.
It's not a communication question as much as a localization question. Before I did mention that sometimes during disasters you have embedded meteorologists, but why not have a meteorologist on staff all the time who really has a localized knowledge of even individual streets and areas, so you can best concentrate your emergency efforts where you know that it's most likely they'll be hit with flooding, winds, whatever, and you can tier your responses more effectively.
Money?
I was going to say cash and say money on
Yeah, that would be really nice.
Be great.
That's great.
It's actually, it's money and resources. Ross's office, which in terms of the Weather Service, we have 122 forecast offices all over the country. The New York forecast office has the second smallest area of responsibility of all the forecast offices next to Key West. It has the largest population. 17 million people live within their area of responsibility. They have approximately 25 people to serve every governmental entity from towns, villages, counties, cities. New York City is a problem and challenge in and of itself, to the states, supporting the states of New York, parts of New Jersey, and Connecticut. It's just a matter of scale. So we try to marshal our resources, so we put the resources where they make the biggest difference. So, at the request of the county emergency operations centers, we'll embed people. Sometimes we'll provide support virtually. But at the same time, the general public, I want to maybe, when you say bring it down to the street level, actually we produce forecasts every 2.5 kilometers for the entire country. So you actually get it down to almost the street level. You just don't realize it. When you point and click on our map, and our very easy to navigate website. I've heard so many ringing endorsements of that. But the underlying information of the forecast and warning information is down at a scale of 2.5 kilometers. And I don't think people realize, this is what you're getting with your tax dollars.
Question in front.
Yes, let me seize upon your word. You said, use the word miss. It's been acknowledged tonight that by this gentleman, that we missed on the subsequent, the following snowstorm and the following season. The question is, that this gentleman said, that was, yes.
I didn't mention.
What was, you said, what was the word that snuck by us? What was the?
All right, so one of those.
Yeah, Nemo was going to tell.
Nemo was your term that you labeled and stuff, and snowstorm followed?
No, Nemo was.
February 2013.
Yeah, that wasn't
Anyway,
fun.
all right. Did you guys miss on Sandy, Irene, to the same degree that you missed on, I'm not pointing to, I'm talking about as an aggregate as a group, as was missed on the nor'easter in 91?
Well, first of all, I say Nemo was, I'm not, again, I don't want to point blame at the weather service, but Nemo was a lot more severe than this forecast.
But I mean, I'm using
I
the
don't,
word
91.
miss. And does the information get to the public
I
prior
don't-
to, as opposed to when we know it's a disaster?
I wasn't in the field in 1991.
All right, but what I'm getting at is the information being imparted to us prior to the event.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to jump up in defense of the Weather Service, because you can't compare the state of technology in 1991 to the capacity we have today. I mean, there is just no difference. I mean, I'm going to pick on Sandy. You know, the experimental models that the forecast offices were using were showing, you know, cyclogenesis of a storm that didn't even exist 5 to 7 days out, and had, you know, at least enough of a hint that there was going to be major impact on the East Coast. That would have been unthinkable a decade ago, let alone 2 decades ago. The same thing with major winter snowstorms. In general, when it comes to really high-impact events, you know, the Weather Service really doesn't drop the ball. You know, snow is just incredibly hard to forecast. You know, small differences changes your snow ratio and can give you the difference between 20 inches and 30 inches. Now, in terms of impacts, you know, telling the public, hey, there's a probability of we're forecasting 20 inches and you get 30 inches. Did we make, you know, was that a bad forecast? All right, open for debate. But I'll tell you, from an impact perspective, you know, you still have the same magnitude of impacts in terms of shutting schools, you know, road closures, difficulty clearing streets, 20 inches or 30 inches. You know, there's some of the marginal events on whether you get snow or don't get snow. All right, yeah, that's still a tough call. But in general, for those big ones, yeah, we can always get better. Don't get me wrong, but they don't drop the ball.
Well, let's move on, because we want to move on, let others, hey, Lisa.
I was going to say that we live in a fairly varied geographical area. And so the forecast that comes out may have a variety of, for instance, let's say, different types of precipitation. And how do you get the message out to people? Because I know my students will say, oh, you're getting snow. I said, well, did you listen to the forecast? Did you hear them say north and west of the city? And so, you know, there may be a difference in precipitation on local forecast here, but I think the problem is they just hear what they want to hear and they don't really listen more carefully to them.
Yes, in the green. Sure.
I just wanted something that relates earlier about the very local forecast. I live in South Islip, and they did give us maps of your exact house address, who needed to evacuate, and hurricane areas in front of the category 1, 2, 3, or 4. So they gave us exact maps of our area down to house numbers. So they do that.
And for like something like Sandy, how did that work?
Well, yeah, and I knew.
Oh, so you got the warning?
I didn't have the report. I didn't know that, you know, so that I was not going to flood, and we two our friends really had to evacuate, but they would, you know, relet streets of water from the streets. Yeah, but they did give us our town, so I like the data somehow.
That's great. That's great. Yes.
When I first came, I'm a contractor, and I was on the South Shore of Babylon. I saw with that storm surge, it goes out. The dishwasher came out of the house, was in the backyard with the plates. The whole back of the house came out. So when they tell you to evacuate, they're giving you the communication. The Channel 12 is excellent, the weather service is excellent, and seeing what the title search does, front to back.
Yeah, Mark?
One of the things that we talk about in forecasting is timing. And timing sometimes changes over the 120-hour time frame that you mentioned that you're looking at from a planning standpoint. As far as an impact, I'll make a question in a second. As far as impact, that 20 or 30 inches that falls mostly during the evening hours is different than if it starts at rush hour here on the LIE up in New York State. And one of the things they did today upstate is they closed the thruway. Down here, we don't tend to react until it's a disaster. We don't close roads ahead of time. We don't take the action. What problems, if any, have you had with timing? How quickly can you adjust to a storm that increases in speed up the East Coast? Or instead of coming at night, it comes during your evening rush hour or any other scenario that you want to point out? What steps can you take to speed up your reaction? And do you get that warning ahead of time or that information from the National Weather Service in a prompt fashion if things are changing?
I think we do get it in a very prompt fashion when there are changes, when there's updates. Within that 120-hour timeline, there are prompts that tell you to look at, I'll use the coastal storm event as an example, to tell you to reevaluate the arrival of tropical storm force winds. Okay, because that's a decision point, or an action point that we have to look at and work back from there, from the arrival of the winds, or evacuations or whatever the case may be.
Would you consider recommending closing some of the major roads here, so instead of, ahead of time, in other words, advise the public that in 6 hours we intend to close the LIE so that you can have your rush hour ahead of time?
That's a state call when it comes to, unfortunately, that is a state call. It's not a decision that we make. The state actually did close it twice. They closed it during the snowstorm in February. When did they close it? The second time.
Following the issuance of a blizzard warning in January of
Right, so
2014.
they actually were very proactive in closing it, but again, they closed it at night, so there wasn't as much of an impact. But when you close down the main thoroughfare on this island, businesses are impacted tremendously. It's not so much impact upstate when you close down the thruway for a short amount of time.
The event I was thinking of was the flooding event, right, in August. I mean, there was actually a lot of lead time. We knew it was going to be heavy rain. I mean, the weather service did a great job.
You did. That was a surprise.
Well, I mean, there was flash flood warnings ahead, for a few inches. But the problem is now you're getting information that's going to be 10 plus inches. How does that information now quickly adjust to the emergency managers who are now going to start shutting roads or rerouting? I mean, how quickly can we make that transition when it's going from bad to worse, right? I think that was kind of Gary.
Real tough one on that one, Brian. That is because we did know. We had all the environmental clues with the flash flood watch out. We've issued many flash flood watches before. And so we did, if my memory serves me correct, we did have a general 2 to 4 inch rainfall. But I guess one of the most difficult things in communicating forecast uncertainty is knowing ahead of time weather conditions might be favorable for the development of narrow bands of heavy precip, mesoscale bands, but until we can actually see where they develop, which is why we had, I think, what was it, a 2 2.5 hour lead time on the flash flood warnings, but that was at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. And so it gets real complicated. in that it is virtually impossible to state exactly where that narrow band of heavy rain will actually develop within that flash flood watch. And so I don't think anybody really had a clear vision that we would see a foot or more of rain taking place in that narrow band. So that's a little bit more.
Yeah, that we've reached,
That's a little bit more
the weather
challenging.
limits in the weather nowcasting, given what's developing.
Yeah, I mean, that's at the challenge, and we have to maybe distinguish between some of our challenges and what we call short fuse warnings and the impact of the mesoscale, we're talking meteorology here, so we're completely blowing our whole communication paradigm. Yeah. But I mean, the bottom line here is there are differences between these large, long lead time events like winter storms and the hurricanes versus these small, more localized events like the flash flood event we had this summer, where they did have the flash flood watch up. They had the discussions noting almost 1 to 2 days ahead, potential for heavy rain. Now communicating, here's the challenge, and this is where the media alarm and some of the communications on uncertainty maybe come in, is better ways to communicate. There is a potential for extremely heavy rain, and then as the event unfolds, we can localize and pinpoint more exactly. It's like I want to give credit to that was a tough call, and for the forecast office here in New York, you need to understand our national goal for flash flood warnings is 1 hour, which is actually very ambitious, and they almost doubled that, which is incredible from a science perspective. But it's still, in terms of what I think here's a conundrum, what the emergency managers need for them to take action. I think they would like more lead time, and that's really where we need more science.
Let's ask the question, were you involved in the reaction to that early in the morning, or were you reacting after the fact on that particular event?
I'm going to give it to you because Nassau County really didn't suffer nearly what Suffolk.
I'm going to say we are reacting more after the fact. Personally, I have an issue with the flash flood warning.
This isn't the time to bring it
The
out.
flash flood warning is put out all the time.
Yeah, that's what I was.
It never does anything, it never really means anything to us. We're flatlanders out here. We don't live in the mountains, we don't have dams breaking, we don't have rivers rushing down through our villages and wiping out homes. We don't have that. We're basically flatlanders, and I don't know if the flash flood warning really, I think people become complacent. I know I've become complacent when that warning goes out. I'm like, oh yeah, they really mean that for Norfolk 287, they don't really mean it for us.
And then we have one this week, the flash flood one this week, right?
So you become complacent to that. And I think what actually happened, if I'm not mistaken, they sent out an emergency flash flood emergency. I forget what it was, but I received it at 3 o'clock in the morning, and all I heard was flash flood. And I thought to myself, nothing, and I went back to sleep. So it wasn't until the damage was actually occurring that I got calls and said, hey, we got to start ramping up the emergency operations center.
So that's a really good point. I mean, not all these warnings are created equal, right? Flash floods,
Right, there's actually
storm surge, and how do you communicate the extremes, right?
there's actually national policy that when you have a historic event or something of that kind of magnitude, where it's over like 9 inches of rain, you can actually change the flash flood warning messaging to a flash flood emergency. We actually did not do that for this particular event. We, at the time, we saw it coming. We had a tremendous amount of lead time for a flash flood warning, and it's one of the things as a follow-up action that we want to take, because I think there is some benefit there, and I don't know if, and it's an interesting question to ask, is whether or not emergency management would have done anything different based on the different messaging that would occur.
One of the things that I think sometimes that I know for myself in media is that when we're forecasting what's a major storm, what's not a major storm. When I'm communicating 4 to 8 inches, for some people it's not a major storm, but it's also how fast is that 4 to 8 inches of snow come down. If we're forecasting 8 to 16 inches, one, usually most people hear, oh, we're getting 16 inches of snow, because they just hear that top number. But is it coming down in 2 hours, or is it coming down in 4 or 5 hours? And sometimes I get into the false sense of security that if we have a flash flood, watch out for 2 to 4 inches of rain. To me, that's a lot of rain, and that alone should signal that we may have some issues. Just like on Long Island, anytime we get over 6 inches of snow, it's a nightmare. Even just on Monday evening when we had a thunderstorm go through, it took people 2 hours to go, 30 miles. So there are some indications out there that sometimes the verbiage of, what the Weather Service does, which is great, and then my job of saying, okay, yes, we have this, or, even different short-term forecasting is, yeah, we're going to get it in this time frame, so this 4 to 8 inches may be different than the 48 inches of snow we had last time. And that's sometimes the communication that some people don't listen to or miss out on some of that information.
You mentioned the weather from yesterday is very bad. So at 2 o'clock I'm driving in Huntington, and it's beginning to rain on the jump. It's coming down, really straight down. WINS says, let's go to our weather expert, Dr. Suffolk, who says, well, the worst is over, the warning's ended, and the weather band is running right through Nassau, about to meet Kings Point in Nassau, and okay, the worst is over. Talk about New York centric. Talk about, in other words, it's safe in Times Square. We're about Suffolk, just about to receive the worst of the weather, and unfortunately, the New York geographical area is huge. So what happens in Times Square is not affecting us in the same manner. So ultimately, no matter what your groups do, unless it's presented to us properly in the public, and I'm not saying you're missing this, sir. I'm just saying, and we are able to interpret it to the public, it doesn't matter what's going on behind the scenes.
The one thing with yesterday's was, with the severe thunderstorm warning and then the special alert that came out after that, pinpointed some locations. Now the question is, how do we get it to you? How do we get it to everyone else? I know for me, how I get it, I have my account set up that I get it through text message and everything else. Through my Twitter feed, I have the national stuff going straight out that way. So that's one of the things of, how do we get short-term, immediate information out there instantaneous? And that's something that has been a work in progress over the last 5 years with technology.
I want to have some discussion about that. This is leading to our transition of what we can do, moving forward, to address some of these issues, and getting the word out with various, media or ways is very important. So let's talk. Is that your question, or you want to?
We have an entire network of information from the arteries on Long Island. This is Northern State, Southern State. Readily fresh, and be able to normally tell us that slow moving traffic is actually 42 to 48. However, right, teaching very good. But we use it with property. Strong thunderstorm, wind gusts and hail, and then maybe a piece of regulations or procedures that will always be
So we do have real-time information on
that's all
roadways. That's a great example of getting information. And that's what I want to, we have examples of ways of getting, we've heard the social media, right, ways, and all the products and the weather service and so forth. But what are ways that would better get the word out and help those, for example, if you're listening on the radio, in your car radio, you're probably at a major disadvantage as compared to someone with their cell phone, right? What are ways we can get around these roadblocks besides getting on maybe smartphones?
There's the written word, there's the spoken word, we're not talking about social media and so forth. But, communication is only as good as your weakest link. And our tools right now, by virtue of the breathtaking speed of advance
I mean, I think, the warrant on forecast, right, is kind of one aspect of the National Weather Service to try to get at the nowcasting. And I'm not sure if Jason, you want to say a few words about where the Weather Service is going with trying to basically anticipate, right, the hazard with some of these times.
Yeah, we're trying to move in a direction where, well, this goes back to the flash flood, and what we call the short-term warnings, thunderstorms, tornadoes, flash floods. The challenges are we know the environments that are conducive to these kinds of events, but we tend to warn on detection, that is, when we observe the phenomena occurring. And the challenge, as we saw, I think, with the rain event, is that wasn't enough lead time. It's not enough for people to react. Tornadoes, our average lead time nationwide is 13 minutes for tornado warnings. In the east, because we don't get big tornadoes, it's more on the order of about 6 or 7 minutes. So we're trying to move to a modeling-based paradigm where we actually run models that are predictive in nature. But then the challenge is that they're not exact. You forecast an envelope of probabilities, that you have a probability of a tornado in this area over the next hour. And again, how do you work with the emergency managers and the public to get them to take action based on some kind of probabilistic information? At least now when we put out a warning and say there's a tornado, we really direct people to take shelter. If you're saying there's going to be a tornado in 50 minutes and you've got a 70% probability in this area, well, what's the action that we recommend? That means one thing to the emergency managers and hospitals. It may mean something for the general public. I think it means that everyone runs home and grabs their video cameras and runs outside to take pictures. This is where one thing with facets in the warrant on forecast is you're seeing the intersection between the meteorological science, the hard sciences, and the social science. We cannot do any of this now without having social science being an integral part of the research, building in the messaging and the communication from the ground up. And if I wanted to come back to one big advance that all our messaging and initiatives right now in the Weather Service have is we have social science integrated at the ground, at the very foundation of our work, what we presented today, because we've recognized our own limitations. We're good meteorologists, we're kind of mediocre communicators.
How many social scientists are in the Weather Service? I mean, are there actually people on staff?
We have 2 social scientists on staff in the headquarters, and they're primarily there to help advise on what social science needed, and then what we do is we contract out for the research that's needed or the work that's needed. So,
yeah, and just from at least, this really bridges the science of forecasting from a modeling with this warrant on forecast. Because one thing, with one of our best operational models, a high resolution rapid refresh, the HER, that gaining popularity, 3 kilometer. It didn't produce any flooding or any big heavy rainfall, more than a couple inches for that. So we have a real problem now where our need for information, like the big heavy rain, is outpacing our ability of some of these models to actually produce those forecasts. There hasn't been a model out there yet I've seen for that event that produced more than 5 or 6 inches of rain for Long Island. So that's like a research question.
Jason, the National Weather Service homepage has a hazard map. The colors which you made reference to in your different graphics are all over the place. Red means severe, red means fire, red means this, blue and green. What can we do, because that seems to be a very quick fix, to make sure that the contrast in colors is sufficient, that you're not using green for flash flood and green for frost warning and green for vegetation growing or whatever. What can we do to make sure that we get standard colors for certain types of events throughout the year? When you look at tornado warnings, if they're going to be red, they should be red across the country, we travel. So when you go from region to region, we have different colors in the local forecast. That's one part. What do we do to implement that?
Well, that's a great question. And you just made me feel very bad because we just redesigned our webpage like three years ago and simplified a lot of the colors. And you don't like our new colors? No, we know actually that the front page of the weather, actually, I'm going to step back. How many people have actually looked at weather.gov, the front page of the weather service?
Front page, look at that, there you go.
Oh, that's pretty good. All right. How many people like it?
You lost half, sorry.
All right, all the weather service employees, you can put your hands down. Look, if you looked at the, I just showed you a few slides on hazard simplification, which is a major initiative within the Weather Service. Started actually 3 years ago, back when I was at headquarters. It started when David Letterman made fun of us. You know you've made the big time when David Letterman makes fun of you. And he made fun of our winter weather warnings with the warning, watch warning, and the complexity of our product suite. Though he didn't quite put it that way. We recognized that we had a problem, so we've embarked on this hazard simplification initiative, trying to simplify the warning suite, because I'm just going to pick on winter weather warnings. It's too complex. We have winter storm warnings, we have blizzard warnings, we have freezing rain warnings, we have advisories, we have watches. We actually confuse the public. This happened during the blizzards when, okay, the winter weather warning is canceled, so we can upgrade it to a blizzard warning. And what do people hear? The warning's canceled. No problem. And then they wake up and they see 30 inches of snow and high winds. We're focusing, on, like I said, we're looking at what Europe's doing with this meteor alarm system, with a simplified color scale, focusing on impacts. Where you have the same color scale based on impact in terms of be aware, you have to take action, or something really, really, really bad is going to happen. And then have a way to then summarize based on that color. So you have a standardized color scale based on impact. But as we're working with the social scientists, this is how people perceive information is really complicated. And if it was easy, we probably would have figured it out by now. But maybe they'll help us and we'll get an easy fix. I think we'll see things, you want to really know when. Really 3 to 5 years. There's just so much foundational work that we have to do to get to where you'd like us to be.
I'd like to recommend something just based on the commentary between the National Weather Service and EOM. You provide a warning to EOM. The National Weather Service here in New York very rarely provides a briefing on their weather service site out of New York for the public. However, if you go to other National Weather Service forecast offices, they will actually have media, video, etc., with regard to a given storm coming on as opposed to text. Now, I don't look at your site all the time, and I'll just ask the gentleman, do you ever provide a public service briefing on a storm in voice, language, video, etc.?
Yeah, we actually, this last winter, started experimenting with that. It is a resource issue, but we are starting, and what we do is we'll post it on our Facebook or Twitter with the link. So that's something that we're looking at, especially for this winter as well.
One of the things I'm hearing is that we have this generation gap, Facebook versus putting it up on the website. And if you're trying to reach the entire public, why aren't we doing both?
Well, we have had it on our emergency manager webpage, but if you're suggesting that perhaps we can maybe put it on one of our local program links, that's something that we can take a look at.
Yeah, Mel?
My question is addressed to our 2 emergency managers on the panel. And let's focus on, this is scenario, the National Weather Service tells you there's a monster storm coming up the East Coast. It's going to make landfall in 6 hours. And you know there's going to have to be evacuation orders. So what are some of the frustrations and limitations of your communicating this information to the people who live at risk and getting them out of their homes?
We don't call an evacuation. The elected official.
Right, so it's
calls
not.
the event. So we have to provide him with the best information.
All right, so he makes the call. The mayor of your town or the governor of the state. What do you do?
In 6 hours?
Robo.
Right. Well, we have the robocall, all right? But again, the robocall is only going to give people information to evacuate. The problem is then going to become a law enforcement problem because the roads are going to get crazy. People are going to get crazy. You know? And that's really the problem. I mean, when Sandy was coming, you had days and days to prepare for it. You knew it was coming. But in actuality, to evacuate a large area in 6 hours is...
Well, make it 12 hours. I mean,
You let we have a robocall, as Len said. We have a new, Nassau County have a new system. I think it's a better system. We can localize the robocall really to a block, to a specific area. Right? We tell people where it's time to go and how to get there.
and that's your limitation.
And that's our limitation, and then it becomes a law enforcement issue. And the cops have to oversee and make sure that it goes smoothly. We certainly can't go out in the streets and make sure it goes
You know, I
smoothly.
remember like in Sandy, in New York City, another problem is different, but Mayor Bloomberg, 12 to 24 hours before landfall of Sandy, had to shut down the public transportation system, get those subway cars above ground, get the buses to high ground, shut down the LIR.
And that was something that they always knew. I mean, New York City was prepared for
And
that.
then the order goes to evacuate the outer boroughs of Brooklyn and Queens. Now, if you were a young mother with a baby strapped to your back and pushing your granny in a wheelchair and told to evacuate.
Yeah, but you don't, but in a normal hurricane situation, you don't tell them to evacuate 12 hours before time. It can't be done in a place like this.
It's also educating the public to know your zone.
Right.
That's critical.
Let's get a few more, yes, sir.
I would just like to say, in my career as a meteorologist, I've watched you guys make tremendous strides. Things have really gotten much more accurate. I take Mark's comment that the one thing that's really still a little bit in limbo is the when. You never know when to speed up, slow down. I think when the forecast was made that Sandy was going to make the hard left, you guys were right on it. And a lot of people had never seen that before and didn't believe it. And I think you should take credit for that and not beat yourself up over those last 2 hours. You know, if the flash flood warning should have been issued at 3 in the morning for everybody was asleep anyway. So, you know, it doesn't make any difference. At some point, you just reach a limitation as to how cute you can get with gadgets and this and that.
Just in the back, you've been very patient, so.
Yeah, what the gentleman was saying, in the car, you get the little radio, weather report. My parents, I live in the South Shore, they always seem to call me with the wrong weather. And then I ask them, where did you get this weather report from? They've got too much information. My father listens to a Connecticut radio station, my mother's watching the Jersey news program, and I'm getting all this weather from them. I'm like, wait, slow down, get the local weather. And I don't think they understand the differences geographically, that what's happening in Connecticut is not just what's happening here and in Jersey. And then, so if you don't get the right information, it's useless.
So
having it its own time, before, after, it's
And I'll tell you one other thing that they don't say as much. They used to say 2 to 4 inches in the city, 6 to 8 in the suburbs. Well, they meant the northern suburbs.
Which ones?
Right? And we're saying, you know, and we end up getting 1 inch.
So there's an educational component. I'm not sure maybe this is the rich, I mean.
Education is very important. With my college students, we're talking, 17, 18 for the most part, 19, 21. They don't even know where they live. My girlfriend, we just got County, what if they, people don't even know if they live on the North Shore or the South Shore. And I get beat up sometimes when I say Suffolk County here or Nassau County here, they go, oh, well, shouldn't people know that? Sometimes we do assume. Or the other thing is that for us on Long Island, we say the East End. There's still some question, what do we consider the East End? I use what the National Weather Service kind of does, you know, William Floyd Parkway, you know, or Route 112, those areas eastward, or, you know, the zone forecast in the National Weather Service I try to use. And you're right sometimes about too much information on whether it's a radio station in the car or TV, Channel 2, Channel 4 to sell. Because all they hear is, oh, we're getting snow. I never said snow last week, but Channel 7 said we're getting 2 inches of snow. Well, that's for Sussex County. And that's part of the problem of communication on our own selves, you know, as just general people listening and paying attention as opposed to, I got the radio on, I got the TV on, I'm having this conversation. So that's the other issue that in time, hopefully, that communication between ourselves, interpersonal communication becomes better.
We're kind of wrapping up here. I want to make sure we have 5 or 10 minutes for the panel just for final thoughts, solutions, right? We've heard some issues, answers to some of the problems that have come up. We've heard all kinds of things here, which have been very important. But I want to hear your last words from what we could do, low-hanging fruit. Maybe start with Christine. We'll start with you.
Well, I mean, just from what I've heard tonight, there's a lot of solutions happening, and I see it in this field of science. I see it all over various fields of science that people are actually thinking about how they're communicating now, and they're thinking about whether it's reaching the audience that they want to reach and whether they're getting their message across. And it's happening among scientists. It's happening among government agencies as well. And people are really trying to make an effort to take that science and disseminate it for lots of different audiences and get those messages out there. So that is happening, and it's a slow change, but it's happening. And I see it happening on the academic level as well as the management and government level too. So I think a lot of these things are changing. It's happening. People are putting thought into how this information is being presented on their website, how they're color coding things, how they're simplifying things, how they're designing different apps to get information out there. So I think a lot is changing. A lot of good stuff is happening, and we need to recognize that in communication. We still have a long way to go, and we're working on it from the science perspective, but a lot of good stuff is happening.
From following up what she just said, there's a lot of great information out there. When I do school talks or in college, everything that I used to be able to get at the university where in Albany, you can only get it there. Now every information that's out there, I talk to people who want to become a meteorologist, you can get it on your cell phone. Thanks to the National Weather Service and the government agencies, every piece of information that, 99% of the weather information is out there. The problem is, what do people do with it? How do they interpret that information? And yeah, there are computer models every day. I can pull up one right now that says Long Island's going to have 2 feet of snow over the next 2 weeks. How do we make sure the correct information that is available is get into everyone? Everyone can be a meteorologist now. Everyone can set up a page, do this, website, Facebook, Twitter, set up their own YouTube account, and do anything they have. So my part is getting the correct information out there as much as possible, whether it is Facebook or what is the best possible way? Is it a television station, a internet, a regular website? Is it social media? There are other things that most people in here probably don't even know of that's out there as well. So that's the other thing. How do we out? How do we take all the information and put it in one location so we can get the proper message out there?
Yeah, I think, just to echo what they're saying, simplification of the information, the simplification of the message is really the key when we're communicating with the general public. I don't think there's any obstacles or hurdles between what emergency management does and the National Weather Service does. I think we work very well. But I think we also need to, part of the simplification of the message is to minimize complacency. Or complacency from previous, I don't want to say forecasts, but previous experiences where nothing happened. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the end, no matter how great the technology gets and how great the forecasting gets and how responsive government can get, it's still up to the individual. If somebody said about a storm that comes in 6 hours, what do you do? The individual has to be prepared. The individual has to have a plan of their own family to know what they're going to do in an emergency. Because the weather service, the government, and everybody else can't keep bad things from happening.
Well, I'm just going to build on those themes and come back to what I had in my slide as the overall challenge, is trying to communicate in simple, clear, and unambiguous ways that drive decisions and actions. And, we communicate in the weather service at two different levels. We communicate with our governmental partners that get, more nuanced and detailed briefings because they've got a more complex decision environment than the general, and then communicating to the general public. And what you're seeing are some small steps that we are taking both within the Eastern region and the Weather Service to actually simplify and streamline our communications through some of the initiatives that we described here. But I really would like to think that our hazard simplification initiative, which hopefully 3 to 5 years will actually resolve. I'd like to come back to a panel discussion about 5 years from now. Hopefully we'll be discussing something, the same problem, slightly differently.
Thank you. So let's thank the panel here for now. Thank you so very much. I hope you've really enjoyed this discussion. I learned a lot here this evening in terms of these issues. Lisa in the back has actually been taking notes. Let's thank Lisa here because these notes are going to be very useful. In fact, I'll likely, if you registered for this workshop, I'll likely send out a version of those notes for you to kind of, we'll distill the message with Christine's help here to get it out to you so you can see what, we try to outline the problems and some of the solutions here. And as we went through it, we can't solve everything here, obviously. Thank you for coming. Thank Mark, AMS, and our students here in the red shirts. Let's give them a round of applause. They helped in the step. Mark, you want to say a few?
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you for showing up. I'd like to take a quick survey. How many people found this meeting via email from the AMS? Please raise your hands. How many people found it from Newsday's PR? How many people found it from the National Weather Service headline? How many people found it from some other way, like word of mouth or Facebook or something like that?
Communication, right?
Communication. Okay, if you'd like to sign up for the AMS or be on our mailing list, I have a sign-up sheet up front, and thank you very much.
Thank you.